The grand ballroom sparkled like something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow lights across the marble floors. Women in expensive gowns chatted with men in perfectly tailored suits, their jewelry catching the light with every movement. The air smelled of fresh roses and expensive perfume. This wasn't just any party. This was one of the biggest charity events of the year, held in the penthouse of the tallest building in the city. Rich people from all over had come to donate money and be seen doing it. The host of this fancy gathering was David Chen, a man who had more money than some small countries. David stood near the massive windows that looked out over the city lights. At 35, he had built a technology company from nothing and sold it for billions. People magazine had called him one of the most eligible bachelors in America. Tonight he wore a suit that cost more than most people made in a month, and he knew it looked good on him. "Ladies and gentlemen," David called out, tapping his champagne glass with a silver spoon. The room slowly grew quiet as people turned to look at him. He loved moments like this, when everyone's attention was focused on him. "Alone, thank you all for coming tonight, and for your generous donations to help children in need," he said, with a smile that had been photographed 1,000 times for business magazines. "I hope you're all having a wonderful time." The crowd clapped politely. David's eyes swept across the room, taking in all the familiar faces. There were movie stars, politicians, other business owners, and old friends from college who now ran their own companies. Everyone who was anyone in the city was here tonight. As the conversation started up again, David walked around the room, shaking hands and making small talk. He knew exactly what to say to each person. With the mayor's wife, he discussed the new park being built downtown. With the famous actor by the bar, he talked about the latest movie trends. With the oil company executive, he debated renewable energy while sipping expensive wine. But David was getting bored. These parties were all the same. The same people, the same conversations, the same fake smiles. He had been to hundreds of events just like this one. Sometimes he wondered why he even bothered hosting them anymore. Then he spotted something in the corner that made him stop walking. There, almost hidden behind a group of people talking loudly, sat a beautiful black grand piano. David had forgotten it was even there. The previous owner of the penthouse had been a music lover, and David had never bothered to have the piano removed after buying the place. An idea started forming in David's mind. A wicked smile spread across his face as he thought about how he could shake things up a bit. David had taken piano lessons as a child, and he had been quite good at it. His parents had made sure he learned all the proper classical pieces that rich children were supposed to know. He walked over to the piano and ran his fingers along its smooth surface. The conversations around him continued, but a few people noticed him standing there and started to gather nearby. "You know," David said loudly enough for people to hear, "I learned to play this thing when I was young." More people turned to look at him now. David loved having an audience, and he could feel the familiar rush of being the center of attention. "My mother insisted I take lessons for 10 years, he continued, lifting the piano's lid to reveal the black and white keys underneath. "She said it would make me more cultured." Someone in the crowd laughed. "Did it work?" called out Rebecca Walsh, a woman who owned several art galleries in the city. David grinned. "Well, I can still remember a few pieces, but here's what I'm thinking." He paused for dramatic effect, making sure everyone was listening. "This is supposed to be a fun party, right? So let's make it interesting." The crowd was definitely paying attention now. People had stopped their conversations and moved closer to see what David was up to. He could see the curiosity in their eyes, and it made him feel powerful. "I'll make you all a deal," David announced, his voice carrying easily across the now quiet room. "Anyone here who can play piano better than me wins a very special prize." "What kind of prize?" asked someone from the back of the crowd. David's smile grew even wider. He knew this would get people talking for weeks. "If someone can outplay me tonight, I'll marry them." The room erupted in laughter and surprised gasps. People looked at each other with raised eyebrows and amused expressions. David Chen, the billionaire bachelor who had never even had a serious girlfriend that anyone knew about, was talking about marriage as if it were a game. "You can't be serious," laughed Catherine Moore, a judge who had known David since college. "Oh, but I am," David replied, sitting down on the piano bench and adjusting it to the right height. "I'm completely serious. Anyone who can play better than me tonight gets to marry one of the richest men in the country." "That's quite a prize, don't you think?" More laughter filled the room. David knew that none of these people could actually play piano well enough to beat him. Most of them probably couldn't even play simple songs. They were business people and celebrities, not musicians. This was going to be an easy victory for him, and everyone would be talking about his confidence and skill for months. "What if someone actually takes you up on that offer?" asked James Liu, who owned a chain of restaurants. David cracked his knuckles dramatically. "Then they better be really, really good, because I don't plan on losing." He placed his hands on the keys and began to play. The piece he chose was one of the most difficult he knew, a complex composition by a famous classical composer that required years of training to master. His fingers moved quickly and precisely across the keys, creating music that filled every corner of the large room. The crowd watched in amazement. They had known David was smart with business, but most had no idea he could play piano like this. The music was technically perfect. Every note exactly where it should be. Every timing precise to the second. When David finished playing, the room exploded in applause. People whistled and cheered as if they were at a concert hall instead of a charity party. David stood up and took a bow, feeling incredibly pleased with himself. "Anyone brave enough to try and beat that?" he asked, looking around the room with a confident expression. People shook their heads and laughed. A few made jokes about not being able to play chopsticks, let alone compete with what they had just heard. David had known this would happen. He was safe in his challenge because he was surrounded by people who had spent their lives making money, not making music. Little did David know that downstairs, in the service areas of the building, someone had been listening to every note he played, someone who understood music in a way that David, for all his technical skill and expensive lessons, had never even imagined possible. The real challenge was about to begin. The party continued for another 2 hours after David's piano performance. Guests mingled and chatted about what they had just witnessed, many still amazed by their host's hidden talent. The conversations gradually returned to business deals and social gossip. But every now and then someone would glance over at the piano and shake their head in admiration. As the evening grew late, people began to leave. They said their goodbyes to David, thanking him for a wonderful night and joking once more about his marriage challenge. By midnight, only the catering staff remained, quietly cleaning up the champagne glasses and clearing away the fancy appetizers that had cost more than most people's weekly groceries. David walked around his empty penthouse, feeling satisfied with how the night had gone. The charity had raised more money than expected, and everyone seemed to have enjoyed themselves. Most importantly, he had shown off his skills and proven once again that he was exceptional at everything he tried. The catering staff finished their work and left through the service elevator, carrying away the last traces of the elegant party. David loosened his tie and poured himself one final glass of wine. He stood by the windows looking out at the city lights below, feeling like the king of his own little empire. What David didn't know was that the night wasn't quite over yet. 3 floors down, in the building's service areas, Rosa Martinez pushed her cleaning cart out of the supply closet. She wore a simple uniform and comfortable shoes that had seen better days. Her long black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing this job for years. Rosa worked the night shift, cleaning the offices and common areas after everyone else had gone home. She preferred it this way. The building was peaceful at night, and she could work without people staring at her or treating her like she was invisible. She had been cleaning this building for 3 years now, and she knew every corner of it. As she pushed her cart toward the elevator, Rosa could hear faint sounds coming from the penthouse above. Music had been drifting down through the building's ventilation system all evening. She had tried not to listen, focusing instead on her work, but the melodies kept finding their way to her ears. Rosa knew about the parties that David Chen threw in his penthouse. All the building staff did. They would see the expensive cars pulling up outside, watch the elegantly dressed people stepping out of limousines, and listen to the sounds of laughter and conversation floating down from the top floor. It was like glimpsing into a completely different world. Tonight had been different, though. Rosa had heard the piano music clearly, and it had made her stop working for a moment. She had stood still in the empty hallway, listening to the complex classical piece being played above her head. The person playing was technically skilled, she could tell that much. Every note was precise and perfectly timed, but something about the music had felt cold to her. Beautiful, yes, but lacking something important. It reminded her of the way she used to play when she first started taking lessons as a child. Focused on getting every note right but missing the heart of the music. Rosa had learned to play piano in a very different world from the one above her head. She had grown up in a small apartment where the walls were thin and money was always tight. Her mother had worked 2 jobs to pay for Rosa's lessons, believing that music could open doors to a better life. And for a while it seemed like her mother had been right. Rosa had been gifted, more than gifted. By the time she was 16, she was performing with the city's youth orchestra. Her teachers said she had something special, a natural ability to make the piano sing in ways that couldn't be taught. She won competitions and earned scholarships. Everyone said she would become a professional concert pianist someday. But life had other plans. During her second year at music school, Rosa's father had gotten sick. The medical bills piled up faster than her mother could pay them. Even working double shifts at the hospital where she was a nurse, Rosa had to make a choice: continue her expensive education or help her family survive. She chose her family. Rosa left school and took whatever job she could find. She worked in restaurants, cleaned houses, and eventually found steady work as a night janitor in this office building. The money wasn't much, but it was reliable, and it helped keep her family afloat during the worst times. That had been 5 years ago. Rosa's father had recovered, but the family's savings were gone. Rosa never went back to finish her music education. The piano in their small apartment gathered dust, and eventually they had to sell it to help pay the remaining medical bills. But Rosa never stopped loving music. She still heard melodies in her head, still felt her fingers wanting to move across piano keys that weren't there. Sometimes, late at night when the building was empty, she would find herself humming songs she used to play, her fingers moving silently as if she were still performing. Now, as Rosa stepped into the elevator to go up to the penthouse level, she could hear that the party was finally ending. She waited a few extra minutes in the service hallway, listening as the last guests left and the catering staff finished their cleanup. She knew David's schedule well enough to know that he usually stayed up late after his parties, probably reviewing business emails or making phone calls to other countries where it was already morning. When she was sure the coast was clear, Rosa quietly entered the penthouse with her cleaning supplies. The place looked like the aftermath of any big party. Empty glasses everywhere, napkins on the floor, and the faint smell of expensive perfume still hanging in the air. Rosa began her work methodically, the way she always did. She collected the glasses and wiped down the surfaces, working her way around the large room. She had cleaned this penthouse many times before, but tonight something was different. The piano. Rosa had seen it before, of course, but tonight the lid was open and the bench was pulled out. Someone had obviously been playing it during the party. Rosa found herself drawn toward it, almost without realizing she was walking in that direction. She stood next to the beautiful instrument, looking down at the black and white keys that seemed to glow under the soft lighting. Rosa's hands were still holding a cleaning cloth, but her eyes were focused entirely on the piano. Without really thinking about what she was doing, Rosa set down her cleaning supplies and sat on the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment, and then she began to play. The music that came out was nothing like what had been played earlier that evening. Rosa's piece was slower, more emotional, filled with all the longing and loss she had carried inside her for the past 5 years. She played a song she had written herself back in music school, a piece about dreams that seemed just out of reach. Her fingers moved with the muscle memory of someone who had once played every single day. Despite the years away from the piano, her technique was still there, buried underneath but ready to emerge. But more than technique, Rosa played with something that couldn't be taught in any classroom: pure emotion. The melody filled the empty penthouse, floating through the air like a living thing. Rosa closed her eyes and let the music carry her back to a time when anything seemed possible, when she believed she could make a living doing what she loved most in the world. She didn't notice that someone was standing in the hallway, listening to every note. David had been standing in the hallway for nearly 10 minutes, completely frozen in place. He had come back to get his phone, which he'd left charging in his bedroom, when the most incredible music started floating through his penthouse. At first, he thought maybe he'd left some music playing on his sound system, but as he listened more carefully, he realized this was live piano music. Someone was actually playing his piano right now in his home. His first reaction was anger, Who dared to come into his private space and touch his things? He was about to march into the room and demand answers when the music stopped him cold. This wasn't just someone fooling around on his piano. This was the most beautiful playing he had ever heard in his entire life. The melody was haunting and emotional in a way that made his chest feel tight. Every note seemed to carry years of pain and hope and dreams that had been put aside. David found himself holding his breath, afraid that any sound might make the music stop. He had heard plenty of professional pianists perform at concerts and charity events, but none of them had ever made him feel anything like this. This music didn't just sound good, it reached inside him and touched something he didn't even know was there. When the song finally ended, David stayed perfectly still in the hallway. The silence felt almost as powerful as the music had been. He could hear his own heartbeat and realized his hands were actually shaking. Very slowly, David walked toward the main room, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. He peered around the corner and saw something that made his world tilt sideways. Sitting at his piano was a woman in a simple cleaning uniform. Her back was to him, but he could see her long dark hair and the way her shoulders rose and fell as she breathed deeply. Next to the piano bench sat a cleaning cart with mops and bottles of cleaning supplies. David's brain struggled to process what he was seeing. The most incredible piano performance of his life had just been given by his night janitor, a woman whose name he didn't even know, who he had probably walked past hundreds of times without really seeing her. Rosa sat quietly for another moment, her fingers still resting on the keys. Playing again after all these years had brought back so many memories. She could almost hear her old teacher's voice encouraging her, feel her mother's proud smile when she performed at school concerts. But reality came crashing back as she remembered where she was and what she was supposed to be doing. Rosa quickly pulled her hands away from the piano and started to stand up, reaching for her cleaning supplies. "Wait," came a voice from behind her. Rosa spun around, her heart jumping into her throat. David Chen stood in the doorway, still wearing his expensive suit from the party, staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. "I'm sorry," Rosa said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. "I know I shouldn't have touched it. I was just cleaning and I saw the piano and I haven't played in so long and I—" "Stop," David said, holding up his hand. "Just stop talking for a second." Rosa felt her face burning with embarrassment. She was going to lose her job. She needed this job desperately, and now she was going to lose it because she couldn't resist playing a song. David walked closer to the piano, his eyes never leaving Rosa's face. "What did you just play?" It was nothing important," Rosa said quietly. "Just something I wrote a long time ago." "You wrote that?" David's voice was barely above a whisper. "You composed that piece yourself?" Rosa nodded, not trusting her voice to work properly. David ran his hand through his hair, messing up the perfect style for the first time all evening. "How long have you been playing piano?" "I started when I was 7, Rosa answered honestly. "But I haven't really played in about 5 years. 5 years? David couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You haven't touched a piano in 5 years and you can still play like that?" Rosa looked down at her hands, the same hands that had just created magic on his piano keys. "I used to be pretty good, I guess." "Pretty good?" David let out a laugh that sounded almost hysterical. "Lady, I just spent 2 hours at a party full of rich people bragging about how well I could play piano. I made this big show about how no one could possibly play better than me." Rosa's eyes widened as she realized what he was talking about. She had heard some of his performance earlier through the building's air vents. "You heard my challenge, didn't you?" David asked, reading her expression. "I heard some music earlier," Rosa admitted, "while I was working downstairs." David sat down heavily in one of his leather chairs, staring at Rosa as if she were some kind of mysterious creature that had just appeared in his living room. "Do you know what this means?" he asked. Rosa shook her head, genuinely confused. "It means you just won," David said simply. "According to the rules I set tonight, anyone who could play better than me would win my hand in marriage." The color drained from Rosa's face. "Oh, no. That's not. I wasn't trying to win anything. I was just cleaning and I heard the piano and I missed playing so much." "But you did win," David insisted. "Everyone at that party heard me make that promise." "You played better than me. Better than anyone I've ever heard, actually. So technically, you're supposed to marry me now." Rosa grabbed her cleaning cart as if it could somehow protect her from this crazy situation. "That's ridiculous." You made that challenge for people at your party. Rich people. Not for people like me. People like you? David stood up again, his voice sharper now. What exactly does that mean? Rosa gestured to her uniform, her cleaning cart, the obvious difference between them. Look at me. Really look at me. I clean your building for minimum wage. I take the bus to work because I can't afford a car. I buy my clothes at thrift stores and I eat ramen noodles for dinner most nights. And you play piano like an angel, David said quietly. Rosa felt tears starting to form in her eyes. That doesn't matter. Music doesn't pay the bills. Trust me, I learned that lesson the hard way. What happened? David asked. Why did you stop playing? Rosa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing a little of the makeup she rarely bothered to wear. My family needed money. My dad got sick and the medical bills. I had to quit music school and get a job. Any job. David felt something crack open inside his chest. Here was someone who had given up everything she loved to help her family, while he threw parties that cost more than most people made in a year. How long were you in music school? He asked. 2 years at the conservatory, Rosa said. I had a scholarship, but it wasn't enough when everything fell apart. David walked over to the piano and placed his hand on its polished surface. Play something else. What? Play another song, please. Rosa shook her head. I should go. I should finish my work and leave before this gets any more complicated. It's already complicated, David said with a small smile. Besides, according to my own rules, you're my fiancé now. The least you can do is give your future husband another song. Despite everything, Rosa found herself smiling a little at the absurdity of it all. Rosa looked at David like he had completely lost his mind. The whole situation felt like something out of a strange dream. Here she was, standing in the most expensive penthouse in the city, being asked to play piano by a billionaire who was talking about marriage challenges and calling her his fiancé. This is crazy, she said, shaking her head. You can't be serious about any of this. Maybe not about the marriage part, David admitted. But I'm completely serious about wanting to hear you play again. That song you just performed, I've never heard anything like it. Rosa hesitated, her hand still gripping the handle of her cleaning cart. Part of her wanted to run away from this entire situation, but another part of her, the part that had been quiet for 5 long years, desperately wanted to sit at that beautiful piano again. One more song, David said softly. Then I'll let you get back to your work, and we can pretend this never happened if that's what you want. Against her better judgment, Rosa found herself walking back to the piano. She sat down on the bench again, her fingers hovering over the keys. What should I play? She asked. Whatever you want, David said, settling back into his chair. Something that means something to you. Rosa closed her eyes for a moment, thinking. Then she began to play a piece that had always been special to her. It was a song her grandmother used to hum when Rosa was little, something passed down through their family for generations. Rosa had arranged it for piano when she was in music school, turning the simple melody into something rich and complex. As the music filled the room, David watched Rosa's face. When she played, she looked completely different. The worry lines around her eyes disappeared and her whole posture changed. She wasn't a tired janitor anymore. She was an artist completely lost in her craft. The song told a story without words. David could hear longing in it and love and the kind of deep sadness that comes from losing something precious. He found himself thinking about his own life, about all the things he had that money could buy, and wondering if he had ever felt as passionate about anything as Rosa clearly felt about music. When the song ended, they sat in silence for a long time. Finally, David spoke. Why did you really quit? He asked quietly. Rosa's hands fell into her lap. I told you, my family needed money, but there had to be other options. Loans or payment plans for the medical bills or... You think we didn't try all of that? Rosa's voice had an edge to it now. You think poor people don't know about loans and payment plans? David realized how naive he sounded. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... The thing about being poor, Rosa continued, is that all your choices are bad choices. You can take out loans you'll never be able to pay back, or you can sacrifice something you love to keep your family alive. I chose my family. But surely there was some way to do both. Rosa stood up from the piano bench, her patience finally running out. Do you want to know what it's really like? My dad's insurance wouldn't cover his cancer treatment. The bills were coming in faster than we could count them. My mom was working 16-hour shifts at the hospital and she was falling asleep standing up. I could either stay in school practicing piano for 6 hours a day while my family fell apart, or I could get a job and help keep us from losing our house. David felt like he'd been slapped. He had never had to make a choice like that. The hardest decision he'd ever faced was which college to attend or which business offer to accept. "I'm sorry," he said again, and this time he meant it. "I've never had to deal with anything like that." "I know you haven't," Rosa said, but her voice was softer now. "That's not your fault. We just live in very different worlds." She started to turn away from the piano, but David stopped her. "What if we could change that?" he asked. "Change what?" David stood up and walked over to her. "What if you didn't have to choose anymore? What if you could have both? The security you need and the music you love?" Rosa laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's a nice dream, but it doesn't work that way in real life." "It could," David insisted. "I could help you. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I could pay for you to go back to school, or I could hire you to give private concerts, or—" "Stop," Rosa said firmly. "Just stop right there." David looked confused. "Why?" "I'm trying to help." "No, you're trying to fix me like I'm some kind of broken toy you found." Rosa's eyes flashed with anger. "You think you can just throw money at my problems and everything will magically get better?" "That's not what I meant, isn't it?" Rosa challenged him. "You feel guilty because you have so much and I have so little, so you want to write me a check and make yourself feel better about it." David opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. Maybe she had a point. Maybe his first instinct was always to solve problems with money because that's how he had learned to deal with everything in his life. "You're right," he said quietly. "That is what I was thinking." Rosa looked surprised that he had admitted it so easily. "But I'm not trying to insult you," David continued. I can't stop thinking about what the world lost when you had to stop playing. Music like yours shouldn't be hidden away in empty buildings at midnight." Rosa felt her anger starting to fade. She could see that David was genuinely trying to understand, even if he was going about it all wrong. "The world didn't lose anything," she said. "There are thousands of talented musicians out there who never get the chances they deserve. I'm just one of them. But you're here," David said. "Right now you're here and I'm here, and maybe that means something." Rosa shook her head. "It means I need to finish my work and go home. It means you need to go to bed and forget this ever happened. And it means we both need to stop pretending that fairy tales can happen in real life." She started pushing her cleaning cart toward the door, but David stepped into her path. "What if I don't want to forget?" he asked. "What if I want to keep talking to you? What if I want to understand more about who you are when you're not just the person who cleans my building?" Rosa stared at him for a long moment. "Why would you want that?" "Because in the last hour you've made me feel more than I've felt in years," David said honestly. "Because you've shown me that there's a whole world of beauty and pain and real life happening right under my nose, and I've been too blind to see it." Rosa felt something shifting inside her chest. This powerful, successful man was looking at her like she was the most interesting person he had ever met. It was flattering and terrifying at the same time. "I don't know what you think this is," she said carefully, "but I'm not some project you can work on. I'm not going to be your good deed or your way of feeling better about your privileged life." "I know that," David said. "I'm not asking you to be." "Then what are you asking?" David took a deep breath. "I'm asking if you'll have coffee with me tomorrow, as two people who want to get to know each other better. No money, no charity, no fixing anything. Just conversation." Rosa studied his face, trying to figure out if he was serious or if this was all just some rich man's whim that would be forgotten by morning. "Coffee?" she repeated. "Coffee," David confirmed. "The cheapest, most ordinary coffee you can find." Rosa stared at David for what felt like forever. Coffee. He wanted to have coffee with her. Not champagne in some fancy restaurant. Not a business meeting in his office, but simple coffee like normal people do when they want to get to know each other. "Why?" she asked finally. "Because I want to hear more of your story," David said. "And because I have a feeling you might want to hear mine too." Rosa almost laughed at that. "What story could you possibly have that I'd want to hear? You're rich, successful, and famous. What problems could you have?" "That's exactly what I mean," David said with a small smile. "You think you know everything about me because you know how much money I have. But money doesn't tell you anything about a person's real story." Rosa considered this. She had to admit she was curious. In all the years she'd been cleaning this building, she'd wondered what David Chen's life was really like behind all the glamour and success. "One coffee," she said finally. "But I picked the place." "Deal," David said immediately. "And you can't pay for anything. We split the bill exactly in half. If that's what you want," Rosa nodded. "Tomorrow is Saturday. I don't work weekends. There's a little diner on 5th Street called Mel's. Do you know it?" David shook his head. He had probably driven past it 1,000 times but never noticed it. "It's not fancy," Rosa warned him. "The coffee comes in chipped mugs and the tables are old and scratched." "Sounds perfect," David said, and he meant it. They agreed to meet at 10 in the morning. Rosa finished her cleaning quickly after that, both of them feeling awkward about the strange turn their night had taken. When she left, David stood at his window watching her walk to the bus stop, something he had never paid attention to before. The next morning, David woke up earlier than usual. He spent 20 minutes standing in front of his closet, trying to figure out what to wear to a diner. Everything he owned looked expensive, even his most casual clothes. Finally, he settled on jeans and a plain white shirt, hoping he wouldn't stand out too much. Mel's diner was exactly what Rosa had described. The building was old and the sign outside was faded, but it was clean and welcoming. David could smell bacon and coffee from the parking lot. He had never eaten at a place like this in his adult life. Rosa was already there when he arrived, sitting in a booth by the window. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, and her hair hung loose around her shoulders instead of being pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger somehow, and David realized he had never seen her when she wasn't working. "You actually came," she said as he slid into the booth across from her. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might change your mind once you woke up and remembered you're a billionaire and I'm a janitor." The waitress came over before David could respond. She was an older woman with kind eyes who called Rosa honey and poured their coffee without being asked. David ordered scrambled eggs and toast, the simplest thing on the menu. "So," Rosa said after the waitress left, "tell me your story." David wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, surprised by how good the simple coffee tasted. "What do you want to know?" "Start with why you're sitting here with me instead of having brunch at some country club." David was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. "Have you ever felt completely alone in a room full of people?" Rosa nodded. "Every day at work. That's my life," David said. "Every party, every business meeting, every social event. I'm surrounded by people who want something from me. My money, my connections, my influence. I haven't had a real conversation with anyone in years." "What about friends from before you got rich?" "What friends?" David asked with a bitter laugh. "I was so focused on building my company that I didn't have time for friends. I worked 18 hours a day for 10 years straight. By the time I sold the business and had time to look around, I realized I didn't have a single person in my life who cared about me as a person." Rosa studied his face. She could see the loneliness there, hidden behind the confident exterior he showed the world. "That's why last night was so important to me," David continued. "When you played that piano, it was the first time in years that someone shared something real with me, not because they wanted something in return, but just because they felt like sharing it." The waitress brought their food, and they ate in comfortable silence for a while. Rosa found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't expected. David wasn't putting on any kind of show for her. He was just being himself, and that self was more vulnerable than she had imagined. "Can I ask you something?" David said. "Sure. Do you ever regret it?" "Giving up music?" Rosa set down her fork and thought about the question. "Every single day," she said honestly. "But I also know I made the right choice. My dad is alive because of the decisions I made. My family kept their house. My mom didn't have to work herself to death. Those things matter more than my dreams. But what if you could have both now?" David asked carefully. "I'm not talking about charity or me trying to fix your problems. I'm talking about you finding a way to bring music back into your life." Rosa shook her head. "It's been too long. I'm out of practice. I don't have connections in the music world anymore, and I'm getting older. That ship has sailed." "You're 27, David pointed out. "How do you know how old I am?" David looked embarrassed. "I may have looked up your employee file this morning." Rosa raised an eyebrow but didn't seem angry. "Creepy, but I'll allow it. And you're right, I'm 27. But in the music world, that might as well be ancient. What if the music world isn't the only option?" David asked. Before Rosa could ask what he meant, David's phone rang. He glanced at it and frowned. "I'm sorry, I have to take this," he said. "It's my assistant." Rosa listened to one side of a conversation about some business emergency that needed David's immediate attention. When he hung up, he looked genuinely frustrated. "I have to go," he said. "There's a problem with one of my investments and I need to be in a meeting in an hour." Rosa felt disappointed, though she tried not to show it. This was exactly what she had expected, his real world calling him back to more important things. "Of course you do," she said, starting to slide out of the booth. "Wait," David said, reaching across the table to touch her hand. "This isn't how I wanted this to end. Can we do this again?" Rosa looked at their hands, his pale and soft from a life of ease, hers darker and rougher from years of hard work. "I don't know, David. We're from different worlds. Last night was like special. But maybe it's better if we just leave it as a beautiful memory." "What if I don't want it to be just a memory?" David asked. "What if I want to see what happens next?" Rosa pulled her hand back gently. "Then you need to figure out what you really want, because I won't be your project and I won't be your way of feeling good about yourself. If you want to be part of my life, it has to be because you actually want to know me, not because you want to save me." David nodded, understanding that she was giving him something precious, a chance to prove himself worthy of her time and trust. As they left the diner, both of them knew their lives had changed forever.